My name is Kevin. I'm one of the pastors on staff here, and as we're talking about fear, I think about me as 10-year-old Kevin, who had no fear, right? No fear, 10-year-old Kevin, and my dad says, oh yeah? Well, I'm gonna bring you to a haunted house. And for some reason in the 90s, the scariest haunted houses were put on by radio stations. And so I think it was like the Cube 93.3 haunted house, but when he got there, it wasn't a haunted house. It was a haunted boat. I'd never seen anything like it. So you step on board, and it's this big, like, white, kind of steam-looking boat, and then it casts off. So you are stuck on this boat. And then from there, you just kind of walk around and explore and get scared. So we're there, and all the people are kind of in the loading area, like in the open deck, about to walk in. And as soon as the boat comes off, it leaves the dock, out comes the chainsaw guy, right? And they had real chains. Like, they kept the chain on the chainsaw. It's not like today where they take them off and it's just noisy. It's like you see the chainsaw going. And me and all my courage, a bolt. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I'm getting away from that chainsaw, which was the wrong move because now I'm alone, right? And I have no idea where I'm at on this haunted boat, and I can't get out. And so I'm like, this is terrible. And I'm kind of looking around, and I end up in this, like, one of the rooms, or I can't really remember. I just remember it was dark, and there's, like, kind of like sporadic lights. And all of a sudden, out of this corner, out of this dark corner, comes a mummy, which doesn't sound bad, but it was terrifying. Because I couldn't see the face, and the cloths are dropping down, and this mummy just kind of slowly walking towards me, and he starts following me. And I, again, still alone, I don't remember. This is where there's gaps in my memory, and I have questions about how this happened. I remember running and kind of walking away and getting into a corner, and the mummy came up to me and was like hovering, like right there, like hovering above me. And I curl into a ball, and I'm bawling my eyes out. And that's my last memory. Like if I recount this event, like I remember everything up to that point, and then the next thing I remember, like, I'm in the car with my dad. And so can you black out from fear? I don't know what happened, or maybe it's just like, it was such a painful memory, it was like, and we're not thinking of that ever again. But it's fear, right? It's Halloween week. It's like, this is the week we celebrate fear. And you go on to Netflix, and it's like all the horror movies are being promoted. And you see the haunted houses, you see the scariest costumes coming out. It's like fear season. And today we're going to talk about fear. It's Fear Factor. We're going to talk about fear, and we're going to one-up fear here. We're going to take fear and turn it upside on its head and see if we can actually utilize fear for something better for our life, other than just scaring people. But let's kind of break down what fear is. We'll start there, because fear, at its most basic moment, it's an emotion. Fear is an emotion. It's one of the most primitive human emotions. Now, there are healthy fears, right? Like that protect you, that keep you alert. And if you're next to a cliff, it's like, well, wait a second, there's a cliff. Like, be careful, like, tread with caution. That's healthy fear. Then there's unhealthy fears, which paralyze your decision making, which keep you from doing something you ought to do, you should do, or that you have no reason not to do, but because of this unhealthy fear, you don't engage. And typically, these unhealthy fears are what we call social fears. And social fear, if I was just to name a few of them, and this is in your notes, so if you want to write these down, you can, but they're not given to you in your notes, so heads up. Here are 5 of the most common social fears, not necessarily in this order, but one of them is public speaking, right? Whether you're in a large group or a small group. This is one of my unhealthy fears. At best, an unhealthy fear will keep you from doing something. Maybe something kind of fun, or you're missing a moment. At worst, They can keep you from living out the plan that God's called you to live out. I remember when I was in high school, graduated from high school, I was asked to speak at the baccalaureate, which is the fancy way to say to speak at the Christian graduation at a public high school. So I got up there and I said yes. I didn't realize how scared I was of public speaking until I got up in front of people. And I had my notes and I was literally doing this. They had to find a table or a music stand for me to put my notes on. And I learned, like I'm still nervous to get up and public speak. And so you'll see, I will never just be holding my notes when I talk. There's always like a table or a podium or something. It's because I don't want everyone to see the shakes that I have, right? Unhealthy fear would have kept me from speaking and from engaging, and I've never had half the opportunities that I have now to present the gospel or to teach a class. And so another social fear is social interactions, right? The stress of meeting new people or engaging at social events. Number 3, rejection, fear of being turned down or not accepted by others. Again, I would not be married right now if I didn't overcome that fear at one point in my life, because many of you know that when you talk to a beautiful woman, it is very nerve-wracking, at least for me it is. And when they say, no, I will not go out with you, you want to quit and curl into a ball. Maybe that's only happened to me, but then there's persistence and there's overcoming rejection. And today I'm married and I love my wife and she loves me, but it would have been one of those life-altering moments I would have missed had I allowed this type of fear to lead me. Number 4 is embarrassment. Some of these kind of go together, but the fear about saying or doing something that could be humiliating. Or number 5, criticism, the being judged or being criticized by others. And these fears can keep us from living out what God's called us to do. In fact, the Bible speaks a lot about fear. One of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is 2 Timothy 1:7. It says, God did not give us a spirit of fear or timidity. He gave us one of power, love, and a sound mind. And so if I'm operating in this fear, that is not from God. Those unhealthy fears, that's not the plan that he wants me to walk out. And so as we talk about fear today, we're going to look at a Bible story, and it's a classic. It's a classic Bible story. We're going to look at a young man who was able to overcome his fear. And as I read through this story, we're going to read the whole chapter of 1 Samuel 17. And as we read through this story, we're going to pick up on how this young man named David overcame his fears. Anybody know what the story is? It's David and Goliath. Spoiler alert, David overcomes his fears and kills Goliath. If this is your first time, I'm sorry. And so to set up the story, I have to kind of read through the first 20 verses it sets up everything that's going to happen. And so if you want to read with me, you can. If you have a Bible on your phone or if you brought your Bible, otherwise just listen and I'll read it to you. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war, assembled at Sokoh in Judah. They pitched up camp at Ephes Dammim between Sokoh and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up their battle lines to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, and there was a valley in between them. So to help you with your geography, there is the Mediterranean Sea, and then there's the city of Bethlehem, and this is about in between. This valley is about in between those two. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out to the Philistine camp. His height was 9 feet 9 inches. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 125 pounds. My son complains about his football gear, which weighs 5 pounds. This guy has 125 pounds of armor going on him. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back, and his spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 15 pounds, and his shield bearer went ahead of him. you ever thought about how big this Philistine, this Goliath was? 9 feet, 9 inches. I found myself standing next to the tallest man in the world at one point. Check this out. That is, what's his name? Ralph? No. Robert Wadlow. It's Robert Wadlow. He's 8 feet, 11 inches. So, I'm a solid like 5'9". And sometimes people have said 5'10".
Nobody has ever said that.
Maybe nobody's ever said that. There is a substantial difference between Robert and myself. Now add 6 more inches, right? This Goliath was gigantic. And as we read later in the story, David is just a young man. He's just a boy still. And so I'd be impressed if David was 5'9". So the difference in stature alone is gigantic. So we keep reading. So verse 8, Goliath stood, and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man, have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will be your subjects. But if I overcome him and I kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man, let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So we have this battle, and now we see fear has now entered the battlefield. So we're going to pause here. There's this battle going on. We're going to get introduced to one of our main characters. This is David. So here we go in verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah, right? He's not far, Bethlehem. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. Any youngest in the room today? 1. There's 1. Okay, there's more. Okay. Yeah. Hey, this is your guy. This is David, right? It's like the youngest, they can actually do things. Like, I'm impressed. I read this story and it blows my mind that the youngest can do. I'm a middle. So obviously I'm a little biased. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend to his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So back to the valley of Elah. For 40 days, the Philistines came forward every morning and evening, and he took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah, which is about 6 gallons, of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are doing, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of the Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." So early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed him. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines are drawing up lines to face each other. David left his things with the keeper of his supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines, and he shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw this man, they all fled from him in great fear. So here comes David onto the scene, and he's watching. He's watching what's happening, right? He sees the fear coming through the army. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see this man keeps coming out? He keeps coming out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage, and he will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." Come on, someone, right? Let's go fight. David asked the man standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes the disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And so here we have our very first step in overcoming fear. The first step is acknowledging that the fear is there. Simply acknowledging the fear exists. David arrives on the battlefield. sees the fear sweeping through. He goes, oh, I see what's happening. This dude Goliath is causing everyone to be scared. We probably won't face a giant in hand-to-hand combat. And I say probably because, we live in some pretty crazy times right now. But we probably won't, but that doesn't mean that the fears we face aren't giants to us. Because the fears we face are so big that sometimes that's all we can see, that's all we can think about. And we've first got to acknowledge that that fear is actually there. And it's going to take on different forms. Sometimes you kind of get that pit in your stomach and you're like, I really should tell the truth, or I need to confess something, or you're kind of hiding something, whether it's reporting to your boss or sharing something with your spouse. You're like, that pit, that feeling, that's fear, right? That's probably some embarrassment. You don't want to share it, or you don't want to experience rejection, and you don't want to experience the consequence. So there's some fear there. Hey, we got to acknowledge that there's another battle going on here. There's fear involved. Or sometimes you're like, I'm in this situation, and I probably should talk about my faith, but I don't want to, or I should stand up, but I don't really want to. And I was on the plane last week, 6 hours, right? And early on in the plane, it's me, and there's this couple next to me, and they're like, hey, can we borrow your pen? And I said, sure. And I hand them a Church on the Ridge pen, which is not stealing. It's called marketing. Right? If you want to take your Church on the Ridge pen home with you, feel free. But when I handed him that pen, I thought, because he goes, is this your church? And I was like, well, this could go one of two ways, probably, right? And now we're stuck together for like another 3 hours. But there's that little something that comes up and you're like, I don't know. Hey, let's address it, right? And it's important to be able to acknowledge these fears, because if we don't, then most likely what we'll do is just go into autopilot and react to this emotion, and this emotion will actually begin driving what we do. But if we can stop and acknowledge, hey, I'm facing something here, I'm facing a fear here, now I can proactively take steps to overcome it, the things we're talking about today. But if we never acknowledge it, we'll just roll right into autopilot. So step one, acknowledge your fears. Back to our story. This is what David has done. He identifies the fear. Kind of an easy one. It's Goliath. Verse 27, they repeated to him what they had been saying, and they told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Sometimes, even those closest to us can cause an element of fear. Sometimes it can even come from family. You're like, there's my family. They're going to judge. They're going to criticize me again, right? It doesn't have to just be from a giant. It could be from your own family. Verse 29, now what have I done, said David. Can I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. So Saul sent to see him. And David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, you're not able to fight this Philistine. You're only a young man. He's been a warrior from his youth. David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came, I carried off a sheep from the flock. I went after it, I struck it, I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its ear, I struck it, I killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Here's the second key to overcoming our fear. Making decisions based on faith, not feeling. Right? David looks at his situation and goes, wait a second. God was with me when the lion came. Wait a second. God was with me when the bear came? Why wouldn't God be with me now when this Philistine is here? Right? These feelings of fear are real. Yeah, fact. Goliath is giant. Like, fact. He is an amazing, mighty warrior, right? All these things are true. But that doesn't mean God's not with him anymore. And so here he makes this statement to Saul, the king. He goes, man, God has been with me. He will continue to be with me. That's the decision. I will go fight him. I'm not going to let fear drive this decision. And over again, we see in the Bible this phrase of, fear not, I am with you. God says this to reassure his people. Fear not, I am with you. In fact, that phrase has been spoken over 365 times in the Bible. Maybe not that exact phrase, but that sentiment. Fear not, I am with you. Joshua, when he's leading Israel into the promised land, God gives him a little prep talk and he says, hey, you're about to go in, be strong, be courageous. Why? Because I'm with you. Right? Mary, the mother of Jesus, hey, you're going to have a baby, but fear not, I am with you. Right? Jesus and his disciples, he's like, hey, come into my end. I'm going back up to heaven. It's now yours to bring this religion, this faith, this relationship into the world. It's a big task. But fear not. Surely I will be with you. Paul, one of the greatest missionaries who wrote a lot of the New Testament, he's speaking in Acts 18, and God says, hey, don't stop speaking. Don't be quiet. I'm with you. And so we have this fear not, I am with you, over and over again. Faith is the antidote to fear. And sometimes a visualization helps. Like, actually picture God. Like, God is with me. I'm nervous to speak today in front of people, and okay, maybe I got a picture. I literally dreamed about this last night. I was dreaming that I came up and it was like a food court, right? And everyone's just like doing their own thing, and I couldn't follow my notes, and I was like, it was terrible. I woke up and I had this picture in my mind. I go, no, wait a second. God will be there with me. He'll be on stage with me as I'm speaking. Like, get that picture in your mind. Like, when I go to this meeting, like, God's going into the meeting with me. When I'm with my family, maybe a family reunion, Thanksgiving's coming up, right? It's like, no, I don't have to worry. God's going to be with me at that dinner table. And if you think about making decisions, there's a lot of factors that go into making a decision. If fear is one of the factors in that decision-making process, you're probably moving in the wrong direction. And so my encouragement is, hey, let's take that fear factor and replace it with a faith factor. And that's what David's doing here. Fear not, God is with me. I'm going to fight Goliath. And so we keep moving on in the story. Saul said to David, all right, go, and the Lord be with you. Perfect, that's the word he needed, right? Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet. David fastened on his sword over the tunic, and he tried walking around, but he was not used to them. I can't go in these, he said to Saul. I'm not used to them. So he took them off. He took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in a pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over, and he saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, my dog, you come at me with sticks? Then the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said. I'll give your flesh to the birds and the animal. So this next response from David is actually our third strategy in overcoming fear. Sometimes you have to speak to your fear. In David's case, Goliath is right in front of him. He's literally speaking to Goliath. Sometimes for us, though, we're going to have to speak to the fear. Even though there's not a physical Goliath in front of us, we can still out loud speak to the fear that we're experiencing. So here's what David says. He says, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down, I'll cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds, the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give it all into our hands. Come on, David. It's like, take that, Goliath, right? He probably said it like with a lot more attitude than I just said. And sometimes I think when you're vocalizing these truths, you maybe say it with a little bit of attitude, hey, fear, guess what I got for you? But number 3 is speaking to your fears. And my gut says this. Yes, David was talking to Goliath, but I have a feeling he was talking to his own soul just as much, maybe even more, than he was actually talking to Goliath. It's like, hey, I need to talk myself into this because this is getting real, and he's coming. And that's okay, right? Sometimes the action that we decided on, the decision we made with the faith factor, that we're moving ahead, isn't lining up with our feelings. And we need to speak to that. David declares, the battle is the Lord's. It's for us, the application is what are the declarations that we need to make with the fears that we face, right? These declarations should remind us of the faith factor, right? And it's such a healthy practice to have in your life because typically when fear starts to come in, it muddles your mind and it's all you can think about and it's all you can really focus on. And you actually have to say, stop, I'm not going to think about this. And you have to begin verbalizing some of these truth statements. And you have to lead your own thought pattern with your voice. And so you speak these fears out. The strategy is this, like, okay, here's the fear, here's the declaration. I need to memorize this and then recite it as many times as I need to. And I need to keep reciting until my mind starts to listen to me. I'm just going to keep on reciting that truth. And so for me, there's 3 declarations that have been really helpful for me. I'm going to share them with you. They're public, though, so you can use them as well. I don't have a coin on them. In fact, the first one is written by David himself in Psalm 56. He says, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust and am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? So if I'm at a gathering of neighbors and a party, right? And I start wanting to pretend like I'm someone I'm not, or I'm getting embarrassed about. It's like, wait a second, what can mere mortals do to me? Wait a second, come on. What can these mere mortals do to me? I live for God. Galatians 1:10. This is my 3rd one. I'm going to skip number 2. I'll come back to it. Hey, if I'm trying to please people, I wouldn't be a follower of Jesus. Come on, Kevin. Who are you trying to impress right now? Right? 2 good declarations. And the other one is when I start stressing out or I start worrying about things. Philippians 4:6 and 7 says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, right? The peace of God, which does not make sense, will guard your heart and your mind. And so I start worrying, I start getting worked up about something. I go, no. I present my request to God with thanksgiving. And then, Lord, help me to experience your peace. Lord, let your peace guard my heart and mind. And you speak these to your fears that you're facing. My application is figure out what your declarations are. You can use some of mine. There's lots of good ones in the Bible. I highly recommend a lot of them. Memorize them, though, and begin reciting them. David made that declaration. Hey, this battle is the Lord's. Back to the story in verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, he took out a stone, he slung it, struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. The imagery there for me, I was like, there's not like a bunch of squishy tissue on my forehead for a stone to sink in, right? It's like, must have hit him pretty good. And so David triumphed over the Philistine. He triumphed over his fear. With a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and he killed him. Man, what a great story. And here's the principle I want to end the day with. This fourth principle isn't really written in this chapter, but it's learning from our fears. Learning from our fears. Because if you continue to read out the story of David, you're going to see time and time again this lesson that David learned, that it doesn't matter how many people are coming against me. Conventional weapons and warfare is not necessarily the answer. The courage and faith that I have in my God is the answer. And so you're going to go on to see, if you read about David, these battles and these victories that he has, these amazing victories in, and he always gives credit back to God. It's this lesson that he learned as a young boy, as a young man, that's going to carry him in as a king. And he's going to be called a man after God's own heart. And we can learn from our fears, right? Sometimes we do overcome them. We go, whoa, that worked. I'm going to do that again. Sometimes we don't overcome them. We go, what just happened? And you have to step back and go, hey, if I'm going to face this again, how can I work through this? I want you to, in just a minute here, we're going to watch a video testimony of Mark Hadley, which is our worship pastor, Rochelle's husband. He's sitting right here in the front row. You can talk to him afterwards. But he came face to face with the ultimate fear of death. And as you listen to his story, it's amazing, but also listen to what he did as he learned from his fears. It didn't just happen. He took that moment and he goes, oh, God has a different plan for my life. And so watch this, and then we'll come back together and close.
It was November 22nd, 1991. A few friends of mine decided to go flying. It was super windy that day. And we had just taken off. We were in a Cessna 172. And it was really, really choppy. The wife of the pilot said, hey, why don't we just go ahead and turn around and fly another day? And I was actually, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. We were coming back around, which was considered a long approach to land. It was an uncontrolled airstrip in Vancouver off of Mill Plain. We were coming into land, and I remember feeling such a heavy coat of peace as I kind of was reviewing my life up until that point. It was very interesting. At that time, I reached down and I had no sweat on my hands. I just felt like I had conquered one of the biggest fears of my life. And right when that happened, all of a sudden, wham, the tail was completely severed. The wind, it was like a roller coaster ride from hell. We went straight up, and I'm thinking we hit a wind shear. The tail hit the ground, and then I realized, no, we're too far up. And that's when everything got really focused. There was no screaming, no, wow, I wonder if I'm gonna live. It was more like I was waiting for the impact to come. And I knew then, like, I'm gonna die. We hit the ground, and I remember looking down and I saw the dust going really slow motion on the ground. And I'm thinking, well, obviously I'm dead. And I was feeling my arm. I knew enough about God to know that this wasn't it. This wasn't the end of my life. 2 weeks later, up in Seattle, outside of Seattle, there was a similar mid-air plane collision. Everyone died. And I remember sitting there in a daydream, and all of a sudden I saw myself standing before God, him saying, what did you do with the gift of life that I gave you? And he wasn't mad at me. He just asked me a simple question. And at that time, I saw myself shaking in my boots saying, I wasted it. It absolutely changed my life. It says in the scripture, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And that was a gift for me to realize that I am going to die someday. And I never forget it. Every single day, I remember that. I remember that someday I will stand before God, and he's not mad. And I didn't waste the last 33 years of my life. It's been a beautiful thing. The first thing that I did, though, was I found myself going to a local faith community. And I remember the pastor saying, for those who want God to rewrite their life, raise your hand. And I remember doing that. I remember raising my hand and saying, And he did. And at that time, I wasn't a churchgoer. I actually was like, I don't know about this whole church thing, but it came to be one of the most profound things in my life, to not just awaken to God, but to get in a community of believers that helped me. And I remember I went in there first time, and I'm not a churchgoer. I didn't grow up in the church, but I saw all these people. I saw these instruments, and they're lifting their hands and they're loving their God. And I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense to me. And I remember just starting to like, I'm gonna surrender, and I'm gonna learn this culture that is different than my own, different tribe than what I was used to. But in that, it changed my life.
Wow, well, Mark, thank you for sharing your story with us. And we're glad you're here with us today. But what an interesting take on fear. It's a gift, right? God has a plan and a purpose for each one of us, and we don't want to miss that. Oftentimes, fear will be one of those things that keeps us from living out that plan and that purpose. Right? We're talking about fear factor. And I want to give you an opportunity because Mark said it so beautifully in the video that sometimes we can think up, maybe you've kind of been listening to everything we've been talking about today, and you go, yeah, fear has played a role in my life that it should not have played in my life. And today, I would like God to rewrite my story. I've learned enough from fear that I go, yeah, God, whatever you have, that's what I want. That's what I want. And so let's just do this. And because I know social fears are a reality, could you close your eyes just for a minute? And all around there, I'm just going to ask one question, and it's this, is if today you go, I would like God to rewrite my story. Starting today, I want God to rewrite my story. If that's you, just raise your hand really quick. Slip it up and then put it back down. Wow, lots of you, lots of people. Okay, anybody else? You go, yeah. It's good, thank you. So for those of you who just raised your hand, I'm gonna do the officiant thing where I'm gonna pray, but really this is a conversation between you and God. I'm just gonna help facilitate some of the words. And you can pray this in your heart and make this commitment to God. So go ahead and pray this. Say, God, today, October 27th, I'm asking you to rewrite my life. Lord, I want a new story, one that is led and directed by you. Lord, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your son, Jesus, that I can be forgiven. And from this day forward, lead me, guide me, and let fear not be a factor. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.